program. All right, very quickly, it's time for our discussion segment. And like we rightly told you before we went for the break, that our guest will be in the studio right after Brekete Family. And we have with us in the studio today Michel Arion. He is an ambassador and the head of delegation, the European Union delegation to the Federal Republic of Nigeria and to the Economic Community of West African States. Michel Arion, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Michelle.
Yeah. Maybe Lucy, you want to give the first shot?
Okay. As a rep to the Nigerian community, where would you place Nigerians in the economy of nations?
Well, as you know, Nigeria is the biggest economy of sub-Saharan Africa. But it's quite a paradox because it's a very rich, very big economy, rich country. Unfortunately, with a lot of poor people. That's a very common problem in Africa. So I would put Nigeria probably in the group of the countries that really have the biggest potential in terms of possibilities of developing. It's a kind of middle-income country. But it's a bit misleading to call it middle income because, as you know, there are a few people with a very large income and many with a very small income. So the average is not representative of the reality. But it's an emerging economy, a real emerging economy. It's an economy that has that we expect to develop very soon and to be much more globalized and integrated in the world economy. So the main message with my Nigerian friends is just make sure that Nigeria is much more open to the rest of the world. You are open culturally. You are moving around, you find Nigerians everywhere. But you don't find Nigerian products.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Where do you find Nigerian product? Well,
because we don't have any product.
Well, you have a lot, but first of all, you have such a big market that you supply your domestic market, and you don't look really at possibility of exportations. And I would not start with exporting to the US or the Latin America or Europe. I would look at my neighbors. I think it's quite strange that you don't find Nigerian products in Cameroon or in Cote d'Ivoire. Well, you can find, but it's not really. You could invade the entire West African and Central African economy with Nigerian products.
Having lived in West Africa 20 years, you have vast knowledge that I probably don't have, even though I'm from West Africa. Nigeria, 4 years ago, we were told we were
developing economy.
We are developing economy, and our GDP was appreciating.
Yes, rebased. They call
rebased. It bothers me that we have a rebasing economy, but it's not reflective. Is that political statement? Is that reality? What is wrong with Nigeria's economy?
No, it was a technical word. Rebasing means take a new base to just build up statistics, to look at the reality, right? So it's a word used by the World Bank and the IMF, rightly so. And perhaps politically it's a new base to jump and to rebound, to give a new impetus to the economy. The problem, as I said before, is that those averages, those numbers do not reflect always the reality. A lot of this GDP, the gross domestic product of the country, is made just of the value of your agricultural products you are producing, but that you are immediately consuming. So actually, it's your agriculture is mainly based on subsistence farming. So it has no economic reality because you don't sell it. I mean, yes, you sell it locally, but you do not transform it. You do not add value. So the GDP is made of the value of your yam, your cassava, your gari, indeed, your cereals, your staple food. But it doesn't reflect the reality of any kind of real trade and added value and value chains. So that's where the problem is, I would say.
Before my colleague comes in now, I want to find out, you said something that our products are not seen within the West African borders, at least not as
much as it could be. Yeah.
My question now is it that our product lacks the quality that meets other standards in other countries of the West Africa? Is it that we lack the technology? Is it that the government is not willing to push forward? What is the problem? And what is the EU doing to help Nigeria?
Well, there are several explanations. The first one I gave already was that you have such a big market that your producers just look at the domestic market. They don't look outside the borders, right? And you are not self-sufficient in many products. Look at palm oil. You don't produce half of the palm oil you're consuming. It would be so easy, I mean, relatively easy, to double your production of palm oil and substitute importations. Second thing is the ways of communication, of transportation. Try to, and the governance of the borders, as I call it, try to drive from Lagos to the border of Benin. Take a bus yourself. It will take you hours and hours. The road is bad. You have roadblocks, customs, very, very
Migrations and all
difficult.
that.
Go to the east. You have no road to go to Cameroon.
You don't.
So building bridges culturally but also physically is extremely important. So transport and the fact that people do not look at opportunities outside are probably the two main reasons. If you look at the numbers, you just mentioned the EU. If you look at the EU statistics, half of our trade flows actually are intra-EU. So the first client of Germany is France. The first supplier of France is Italy. You see, it's not the America, it's not Japan, it's not China. No, the bulk of our trade flows is intra EU.
Relations.
We are talking about goods. I could talk about people. I mean, we travel so much within EU. There are no borders. There are no borders anymore, or almost no border. At least in the Schengen area. That's something I would believe ECOWAS could really improve, and within ECOWAS, Nigeria has got the primary responsibility, because you represent 70% of the GDP. You are the powerhouse of ECOWAS, and if traders do not sell outside Nigeria, it's perhaps also because they don't have a passport, they don't have an ID card, they don't want to be harassed at the border and things like that. So free movement of goods, free movement of people, free movement of financial services. You export, but will you be able to bill and to cash the money, to bring back the money? To perhaps you have a bank account in a foreign, in a neighboring country. Can you transfer the money easily or not? So it's a mix of different difficulties, I would say.
Okay, we will be going on a very quick break.
Yeah.
When we come back, we'll continue on the discussion. The program continues. It's still New Day. Don't go anywhere.
To copy this tune, press 11. To copy this tune, press 11. For this tune, press 11.
So you must marry me. You gon' love me. You gon' kill me, baby. You gon' follow me. You're my remedy. You're my melody.
From yesteryear's evergreens to today's classics, MTN Color Tunes has got them all. Dial *410# or text APP to 4100.
MTN, everywhere you go.
Yeah, the program is still New Day on PTV, and we're talking Nigeria economy and the EU's involvement in our polity and economic bias.
Yeah. Yes, I would like to know, you actually give us some kind of expository into some of our major problems, especially as it relates to trade with neighboring countries. But most times I know that you represent a particular country and a particular community, talking about the EU. I want to know, each time you have interface with our own government, is there any time you iterate some of these points that you rightly brought to the fore today, so that they can also have a tenacious understanding of some of these challenges. Was there any time that you had the opportunity to tell our own government that this is what you need to do in order to get your economy going?
Well, for sure, we have we as EU we have an excellent political and policy dialogue with Nigerian authorities. We do meet with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry, Minister of Finance, Minister of Agriculture, because I mentioned agricultural products are probably the area where Nigeria has a lot to diversify its exports, for instance. So, and when I say EU, I mean me as representative of the EU, but also my 20 European colleagues in Abuja. I like to always explain that EU is also EU and member states, right?
Yeah, of course.
So in Abuja, the EU is represented by 21 European ambassadors,
Okay.
20 bilaterals and 1 multilateral like me. Plus in Lagos, we have 9 consul generals or diplomatic missions. So in total, we have 30 diplomats, head of mission from the EU. So the bloc, is quite active locally, but also in Brussels. I mean, recently we had a visit of the official visit of the Nigerian government with Foreign Minister, State Minister of Trade, Minister of Interior, where we discussed those things, certainly. His Excellency President Buhari was in Strasbourg 2 months ago. He addressed the plenary session of the European Parliament. More than 700 members of the European Parliament from 28 countries. You see, we discussed those things. We see Nigeria, yes, in our bilateral relations, but we will see also Nigeria as the really the leading country within ECOWAS, on the continent at the AU, and even in the world. So when Nigeria was until recently, member of the Security Council, it may become soon again a member. Nigeria has been quite often sitting at the Security Council. So we see Nigeria as a global partner, which gives Nigeria the right to speak, but also the obligation to engage with the other nations at bilateral, regional, continental, global level. And we do that constantly. So we have this dialogue in the headquarters, but also here locally. And we make always that point of the necessity for Nigeria to be much more open in terms of trade, but also in terms of free movement of things. Open doesn't mean just without control or without monitoring. Of course, you have to monitor your external borders of ECOWAS. Very important for the fight against terrorism, for instance. We discuss trade, but to develop trade, you need security and stability. Nobody will cross the border between Nigeria and Chad or Nigeria and Niger if Boko Haram is around, of course. So discussing those issues is also, I would say, a key element of our political dialogue.
So what will you say is the level of response, each time you have this opportunity to interact? Because if all this that you've said so far is anything to go by, I think that by now our economy should be one of the best, if not the best. So what's the level of response you get from our own leaders, when you come sharing some of these very, very vital informations with them?
Well, we still have a relatively young government. We have 6 months of government. The government actually was in place in December. So we have started discussing in February, in March, we are in May. So we are really developing this dialogue with the new administration. Very soon we will have our EU Vice President and High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy. She will be here for the Security Summit, and we do intend to again raise those points with Nigeria. One thing that is important is when you look at the statistics, again, those statistics do not reflect the reality. The magnitude of informal trade in this country and in the region, by the way. So actually, a lot of Nigerian economy is just operating below radar. You don't see it. You see it in the street. You don't see it reflected in the statistics of the of the NBS or of the economy. And that's how people survive, by the way. It's how they survive. And all those, I'm saying it's so difficult for traders to export and import. Well, if you look at if you go there, you will see hundreds, thousands of people crossing the border with small consignments and doing business. But this is informal. So much more could be done if it was formal. So another issue, even a challenge for the government, is to make more and more of this informal trade formal. Not for the beauty of nice statistics, no, but it's also for different reasons, to be able to better plan your development, but also to raise taxes, because if you are informal, you don't pay VAT. The point is not to go from 5 to 10 or 15% of VAT, it's just to impose VAT whatever the rate is, and I believe you need a higher rate, but to impose more people have to keep their accounts, have to have a bookkeeper, they must show their invoices in and out and be taxed.
Are there bilateral agreements between the EU and Nigeria, for instance? Are there disagreements? Are there grey areas that Nigeria as a country needs to tidy up for more collaboration with the EU?
Well, I would say two major issues seen from Europe. One is migration, and the second one is the EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement. So let's start with this EPA, or EPA because we just discussed that already a lot. EPA is the economic partnership between ECOWAS and the EU. Most ECOWAS member states have signed, Nigeria has not. So there we very much regret the fact that Nigeria is still very reluctant to sign the EPA.
Why are we not
signing?
Well,
it's based on, I would say, I think wrong information, ideology, just people don't take the time to read the EPA and look at the facts. So
what's
people are
the benefit of the EPA to Nigeria?
Direct access to EU, quota-free, duty-free. Duty-free, quota-free. Today, you little because 90% of your exports is oil and gas. So this is tax-free already. So the margin is quite small. Let's say 5%, 10% maximum of your exports are going to EU. Today, do pay taxes, import duties. Your cocoa exporters, your leather exports. So you wouldn't have an immediate access. But more importantly, machinery, equipment for your industrialization would attract less import duties, seen from an ECOWAS point of view, because you have adopted the CET, the Common External Tariff of the ECOWAS, which would impose a gradual decrease in the import duties. So you are winning on the exports and you are winning on the importations of the products you need for your industrialization, not the consumer products. People are just arguing that EU will invade, will flood Nigeria with agricultural products. It is simply not true. Those agricultural products are excluded from the deal, you see? And we do not give any subsidy. We do not subsidize our exportations of agricultural products. People are always arguing that EU is subsidizing farm products. It's not true anymore. It's finished. You see, so just it's a problem of update and of understanding. And a lot of lobbies from people who do not want that kind of agreement, which would oblige them in a way to formalize their trade relations and to improve the way importations are managed. So EPA is certainly a point where we do remain optimistic, but a lot is to be done in terms of communication and explanation. Second point is migration. Well, again, a lot of, I would say, confusion between, discussing what is really at stake. We are not talking about those poor people from Syria, Afghanistan or Iraq who are asylum seekers, are refugees, who are just fleeing their country because of war. This is not the case of Nigerians. We are not talking about the same magnitude, the same numbers. We are not talking about 1 million or 2 million Nigerians going to Europe. We are talking about a few thousand Nigerians who actually, many of them, they go to Europe by plane with a valid visa, and then they overstay. You see, that's the main issue. Those people are irregular in our countries, and they have not been allowed to stay because they have no job, they have no reason to stay, and we are asking Nigeria to take them back. So the question of return and readmission of irregular migrants is one issue. We are working with the government, and we are quite confident we will find a global agreement. There are already bilateral return and readmission agreement between Nigeria and a few countries of the EU, UK, France, Italy, Spain, Belgium, agreements or gentleman agreements or memorandum of understanding, so arrangements, I would say. We would like to do that at EU level, just to simplify, to reduce transaction costs and things like that. So that's an issue. But again, if you want really to fight irregular migration, you have to fight criminal networks. A lot of those Nigerians are victims, in particular women, as you know, the poor women that are abused. They are involved in criminal networks of human being trafficking. We have to fight those criminal networks, and we have to address the root causes of why do people stay in Europe? Why do they want to leave Nigeria? We discussed those opportunities of Nigeria. Well, it's because they don't see a future.
Yeah.
They don't see their future in Nigeria. They are hopeless, and then they think they dream of green pastures in Europe. And I can tell you, it's not that green in Europe, and it's very difficult for them. So again, a lot of explanation, communication has to be done, including with your media, to explain to the youth of Nigeria that they better find their future in Nigeria or maybe in the region. I very much insist on, you know, 90% of West African migrants actually do migrate within West Africa. You have millions of Nigerians in Senegal, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in Liberia, everywhere. You have millions of Senegalese, Ivorians, Burkina in Nigeria. So that's very good. That's very good. This free movement of people is excellent, and you are mixing population, and it's
building the region.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I would still like to take you back to the EPA agreements that Nigeria fails to sign. I don't know. Was there any time that a particular reason was given for not appending to this document, or you think there is no political willpower to actually sign this document, considering the numerous benefits we stand to gain as a country? Or maybe you think our leaders are not being given the right information?
Yeah, that's exactly the point.
All of
it's
this.
a question of information. They are listening to people who are producing wrong so-called economic impact studies that are claiming that the EPA will destroy thousands of jobs, thousands of companies, and of business will have to close. This is simply wrong. This is simply untrue. The figures have been manipulated. The studies have been wrongly conducted. We have shown studies done by the World Bank. We are happy to use any neutral academic or scholar who would do that properly. We have done that. I mean, you know, it's a difficult science, economic forecast. Who knows what will be the structure of the importations of Nigeria in 10 or 20 years' time? We are talking about a period of 20 years, the transition period. The transition period for Nigeria vis-à-vis EU is 0. The day you sign, duty-free, quota-free access, right? For EU to have access to the West African market, not Nigeria, I mean West African market globally, it will take 20 years, in 4 periods of 5 years, precisely to allow for adaptation, to allow for monitoring, to allow for a review of the condition. So we have tried to explain to Nigeria that we had absolutely no offensive agenda in terms of exportations to Nigeria. We do not expect Nigeria becoming the place where we will export a lot of products. Just those equipment and machinery for the industrialization. What we do expect is a stronger ECOWAS, a better free movement, a better common market of ECOWAS, where our European investors will invest. We will not sell to West Africa, we will invest in West Africa, and we will create jobs. What you desperately need, creating jobs.
Yeah.
And we will produce the added value in Nigeria and in West Africa. When a European investors looks at Nigeria, they see Nigeria as a place with a huge domestic market, but also the capital of West Africa. And the real market is not 180 million consumers, it's 350. It's West Africa. So huge companies, big companies from Europe will see Nigeria as a platform to export throughout the country, throughout the region.
Okay, for how long has this EPA been lying fallow? You know, for how long? For how many years now?
Let's say to remain optimistic. Let's say 7 years.
For 7 years.
Since 2008. Yes.
Since
yes.
2008.
Actually, it's 2000, but there was a transition, a preparatory period of 7 years.
Okay, are you giving up on Nigeria now, in as much as we've not signed the
No, we
EPA,
are
or
not.
you're still going to carry out some form of negotiation and maybe reorientation so that we can actually append to this
The
document?
negotiations are closed with ECOWAS. So the real issue, we have a deal with ECOWAS, with the EU. The negotiations were between ECOWAS and EU. Then we, EU, we went back to our member states, and the 28 member states did agree the deal. So they all signed. Okay, ECOWAS went back to the member state, the 15 member states, and 13 did sign. 2 did not, Nigeria and the Gambia. Imagine, the biggest and the smallest. I mean, so there is absolutely no reason to explain why either Nigeria or Gambia would be in the same basket, frankly speaking. So it's really an internal problem to ECOWAS. And the problem is that Nigeria, by not signing, just has quite a negative impact on, for instance, the 2 major economies after Nigeria, which are Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, because Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, being middle-income countries, they have to pay taxes when they enter the EU market.
Would it be that the reason Nigeria has not signed is because in the past we have signed some agreements and then it fell short of what we expected?
Yeah. Well, I don't think so. I'm not saying that the EPA will immediately develop the exportations of ECOWAS or Nigeria to Europe. Unfortunately, you do not have much to export. But you have a few things that you could really develop. I'm thinking of cocoa, I'm thinking of rubber, I'm thinking of cashew nuts, agricultural products, and I hope transform. So not cocoa beans, but cocoa paste, or butter, or if not, why not chocolate, by the way?
Why not?
Why not? Or grilled and salted cashew nuts, not raw cashews, you see? Or rubber. Why not exporting tires rather than rubber? So the whole value chain of a few products could certainly be developed, but not as much as other countries from Africa would export to Europe. Look at South Africa. We have an EPA with South Africa. They gave us access to 98% of their market. You are giving us 75. I forgot to mention that in this deal, we are accepting a 100%. So any product, everything but arms, as we say. You can export whatever you want, but arms and drugs. I would add. But on the reciprocity is not there because you do not open more than 75% of your market. So you are really protected against all risks.
My very last question
Yes.
before my colleague throws his will be, could it be that Nigeria is waiting to get to that point where we have developed all of this before we sign the EPA?
Yeah.
Because if we don't want to export rubber, we want to export tires, we want to export plastics and all that. We don't want to export cocoa, we want to export maybe
Chocolate.
chocolates.
Yeah.
Probably we're taking our time to set the structure
Yeah.
so that when we sign the EPA, we're just hitting the road and running.
Well, this is the theory of nascent industries, right? Or infant industries. Well, give us time. The problem is that you've been trying for 50 years, 50,
Yeah.
and the trend, you had those industries before. You had Michelin and Firestone, and you had industries. The problem is that they have been, look at your textiles industry, totally destroyed. By whom? Is it by Europe? Do I have to put my finger on the name of the country destroying African
Textile.
industries? So this theory actually is a valid one. That's why we are giving 20 years, by the way. 4 times 5 years. But protecting your industries until they reach a certain level doesn't mean giving a monopoly, giving an exclusivity. You know, the problem with Nigeria and with the protectionism of Nigeria is there is a double problem. First, you impose import bans, but actually you cannot control them. So you are developing smuggling. Right? So it makes, the more you will impose import bans, the more you will develop smugglers and give opportunities to traffickers. And second, you do protect one industry, and there is no competition within the sector. So instead of giving a kind of monopoly or a rent to one businessman, you should perhaps protect the sector, but then make sure that there is a real competition aiming to improve the competitiveness of a given sector. Look at, we know in Asia, you know, the tigers or the dragons of China, of China,
Of the Asian
Korea.
country, yeah.
Well, they protected in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They protected their market, but there was internal competition. Toyota, Honda, Mitsubishi, Suzuki, they were competing against each other. So nobody had an exclusivity, nobody had a rent to just to benefit from. So and they reached a level where they became competitive globally, and now they are exporting more than 50% of their production outside Asia.
There's no doubt that from your explanation, for the past 7 to 10 years, we've actually missed a lot looking at it from the economic point of view. But before we let you go, I would like to ask, is Nigeria having a second chance to sign the EPA? Will you give Nigeria the second chance to sign the EPA?
For sure. For sure. You have a second chance, you have a third chance. We will start renegotiating the post-Cotonou agreement in 2020, right? So we have 2, 3, 4 years of potential discussions. My real problem, and what Nigeria should really look at, is the impact on the neighbors. Because the more Nigeria is taking time, the more the neighbors, in particular Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, are impacted. And then, you know, I have heard people saying, well, we want to preserve the 180 million Nigerians against 40 million Ghanaians and Cote d'Ivoire. It's not like that. It's not like that. Be very careful with the way your neighbors are looking at you. And ECOWAS is so important. It's really the future of the region, not only for the common market of West Africa, but also for the stability of the region, for the security of the region. If you don't make deals with your neighbors, you will have a terrible impact also on your stability and your security. Look at what's happening in Cote d'Ivoire, in Burkina, in Mali, in terms of terrorism. If you don't help your neighbors on terrorism, they will not help you on economics. I mean, it's not like that, but I mean, it's a global approach of political and economic integration. There is. You must do that at the same time.
Thank you, Mitchell Arion, for coming on the show today. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
so
Thank you
much.
for your invitation.
All right, this is how much time will permit us on our discussion segment. We'll take a very quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking sports. Please stay with us.